They say you can never really know a person until you're trapped with them. This happened about 4 years ago, when the weight of the world felt too heavy. My girlfriend, Maya, suggested we find a remote cabin to clear our heads. Naturally, I loved the idea, but I wasn't exactly rolling in cash. So she proposed a double date with my oldest friend, Leo. It was the perfect solution to split the bill on a winter retreat. We found a place deep in the mountains and booked it immediately. A week before the trip, Leo called me in a total panic. He and his long-term girlfriend had just gone through a messy breakup. Maya and I worried about the vibe, but Leo insisted he wasn't coming alone. He had already found someone new to join us for the weekend. A girl he'd only known for a few days named Chloe. We weren't thrilled about bringing a complete stranger into the woods, but Leo was paying his share, so we decided to make the best of it. The drive up was filled with a thick, heavy silence. Chloe was soft-spoken, almost to the point of being invisible. She didn't look like a threat, just a quiet girl in an oversized sweater. But there was something about the way she stared out the window. She didn't blink for minutes at a time, just watched the trees pass. Maya tried to make small talk, but Chloe only offered one-word answers. We finally reached the cabin as the sun began to dip below the pines. The cabin was beautiful, built from heavy logs and smelling of cedar. We got a fire going and tried to settle into a vacation rhythm. Leo seemed desperate to show off his new catch to us. You are so. But Chloe just sat in the corner, watching us with those wide eyes. The wind began to howl against the glass, rattling the frames. It was exactly the kind of isolation we had asked for. I didn't realize then that isolation is just another word for being trapped. To break the tension, Maya pulled out a deck of cards. We started a friendly game of hearts, laughing and joking by the fire. Chloe joined in, and for a moment she actually seemed normal. Then, Maya made a move that cost Chloe the round. The change in the room was instantaneous and terrifying. Chloe didn't just get upset, she went completely cold. She dropped her cards and glared at Maya with pure, unadulterated hatred. Suddenly, Chloe slammed her fists onto the wooden table. She started screaming at Maya, accusing her of cheating in a raspy voice. The sound was full of venom, like nothing we had heard before. We all froze, stunned by the sheer violence of her reaction. Leo tried to put a hand on her shoulder to calm her down. She swiped at him like a cornered animal and stormed out. The silence that followed was even louder than her screaming. An hour later, Chloe emerged from the bedroom as if nothing happened. She helped Maya with dinner, humming a tune that sounded like a dirge. The shift in her personality was enough to give me whiplash. That night, Maya and I lay awake, listening to the walls. From across the cabin, we could hear the muffled sounds of a fight. Leo and Chloe were whispering, but the tone was sharp and desperate. I closed my eyes, praying the morning would come sooner. Leo was trembling when he woke us up at 3 a.m. He whispered that he found something in their bed. When he moved the duvet, a cold piece of steel was waiting. A heavy hunting knife was tucked right where Chloe had been sleeping. He said she'd been standing at the foot of the bed, just watching him breathe in the dark. She didn't say a word. She just stared. Then she turned and walked out into the hall. Leo was convinced she was waiting for him to close his eyes. We sat there in the dark, hearts hammering against our ribs. The silence of the cabin felt like a physical weight. Then we heard it through the thin walls. That same low, rhythmic humming from earlier. It sounded like she was dancing in the kitchen. Leo peeked out and saw her skipping in circles. She was moving with a strange, jerky energy. Suddenly, she stopped and faced our door. In a voice that wasn't hers, she whispered, "I see you." She wasn't even looking at the crack in the door. She was looking through it, into our souls. Then the humming started again, louder this time. The sound of pure, unhinged malice in the dark. A few minutes later, the front door slammed shut. We rushed to the window and saw a shadow moving. Chloe was walking toward the tree line. She was wearing nothing but a thin silk nightgown. The temperature was well below freezing that night. She didn't shiver. She didn't hesitate. She just vanished into the black wall of pines. We looked down at the fresh snow by the porch. Her footprints were deep and perfectly spaced, like she was marching toward a specific destination, a destination only she knew about in those woods. We spent the rest of the night barricaded in our room. Leo wouldn't let go of the door handle. None of us spoke, terrified she was listening outside. At 6 a.m., we heard the kitchen faucet turn on. The clinking of ceramic plates followed shortly after. We walked out to find her washing dishes. She smiled and asked if we wanted coffee. It was as if the night before had never happened. The transition back to sweet Chloe was nauseating. We didn't eat, we just started grabbing our bags. We had to get out of there before the sun set again. As Leo was packing his rucksack, he froze. He reached into the side pocket and pulled it out. The same hunting knife from the bed was tucked inside. She had brought it back in from the woods. We didn't say a word to her as we loaded the truck. The drive home was 5 hours of suffocating silence. Chloe sat in the back, staring out the window. She was still humming that same low tune. I kept my eyes on the rearview mirror the whole time, waiting for her to reach for the bag between her feet. We dropped her off at a gas station near her apartment. Leo tried to call her the next day, but the number was disconnected. Maya searched every social media platform for her face. There was nothing. No Chloe, no records, no history. It was like she had materialized out of thin air. The address she gave Leo turned out to be a vacant lot. We realized then that we had invited a total stranger into our lives, someone who used a fake name and carried a weapon. To this day, we don't know what her plan was, or if she's still out there finding another group of friends. The mystery of her identity is a shadow that never leaves, a reminder that you never truly know who is standing next to you. For the last few years, I've made a habit of disappearing. I'm not a social person by nature. Crowds and small talk make my skin crawl with anxiety. So, I started renting remote cabins to find some peace. I'd save up for months just to afford a weekend of silence. This particular trip took me to a modern glass cabin. It was deep in the valley, miles from the nearest town. The walls were mostly windows, offering a view of the pines. At the time, I thought the transparency was beautiful. I didn't realize it meant I was on display, a lone target in a house made of glass. I arrived on a Friday evening, as the sun was dipping. The air was crisp, and the silence was absolute. I made a simple dinner and sat by the floor, 2 ceiling windows. I had a stack of books I'd been dying to finish. Reading in the wilderness is my only form of therapy. I spent the first few hours completely at ease. The wind was the only sound against the glass. I felt safe, tucked away from the noise of the world. But as the darkness settled over the valley, the feeling shifted. The woods didn't feel empty anymore. They felt like they were watching me back. The next morning, I decided to head out for a long hike. I've always found peace in the rhythm of walking through the trees, but as I moved deeper into the forest, the silence felt heavy. I started hearing something behind me, the distinct snap of dry twigs and heavy branches breaking. It wasn't the random scurrying of an animal. It sounded deliberate, like someone was matching my pace. They were staying just out of sight. Every time I turned around, the woods were empty. But the paranoia was already sinking its teeth into me. I cut the hike short and hurried back to the house. That night, the anxiety from the trail wouldn't let go of me. I felt exposed in that glass cabin, like a specimen under a microscope. I decided to have a few drinks to take the edge off. Eventually, the alcohol started to work. I put on some music to drown out the silence. Around 11 o'clock, I heard a sharp knock at the heavy wooden door. I froze and turned the music off immediately. I walked over and looked through the small windows. I saw nothing but the dark porch. I turned to walk away, and then it happened again. A slow, rhythmic pounding that vibrated through the frame. I flicked on the porch light, and my heart nearly stopped. Standing there was a man who looked like he belonged in a boardroom. He was wearing a sharp, dark suit with a perfectly knotted tie. His hair was slicked back, and his face was clean-shaven. He had an athletic build, standing about 6 feet tall. He didn't look like a hiker or a local. He looked like he was ready for a high-stakes business meeting. The sheer wrongness of his attire was terrifying. He was standing in the middle of the woods at midnight. He didn't move or blink. He just stood there, staring at the wood of the door. I asked him what he wanted through the door. There was a long, unnatural pause before he spoke. He claimed he'd been driving with his girlfriend and got lost, but his voice was completely void of any human emotion. It was flat, mechanical, and predatory. He asked to come inside to use the phone. I told him to stay back and wait at the end of the driveway. Didn't move an inch. He said something was outside, and he needed to hide. When I threatened to call the police, he didn't run. He just started laughing, a cold sound that made my blood turn to ice. I looked back at the window, and he had his face pressed against it. He was inches away from me, his eyes wide and unblinking. In a calm, terrifyingly familiar voice, he spoke. "Come on, Victor. Just open the door." My heart hammered against my ribs. This total stranger knew my name. I didn't wait another second. I grabbed my phone and dialed 911, screaming for help. By the time I finished the call, the porch was empty. The man in the suit had vanished into the shadows. I didn't move from that spot for 15 minutes. When the patrol car finally pulled up, I practically threw the door open. The officer looked confused as I rambled about the man. I told him about the suit and the laughter. He said they hadn't seen anyone on the road. No other neighbors had called in any reports. I was a nervous wreck, shaking so hard I could barely stand. The officer was kind, though. He could see I was in no state to be alone in that glass house. He suggested I stay at a hotel in town for the night. I told him I'd been drinking and couldn't drive. He was nice enough to offer me a lift. We walked out to the driveway together. The blue and red lights reflected off the trees. As we reached my car, the officer stopped. He made a sharp, shocked sound. He pointed down at my front tires. They were completely deflated. The rubber was shredded by deep, jagged cuts. Someone had systematically slashed all 4 of them. It happened while I was inside waiting for the police. The man in the suit had been making sure I couldn't get out. I started to unravel right there in the gravel. The officer drove me to a nearby hotel. He stayed with me in the lobby until I checked in. I spent the rest of the night watching the front entrance. My dad came to help me with the car the next morning. I never got an explanation. I never found out how that man knew my name. The owner of the cabin apologized repeatedly. But I didn't want a refund. I just wanted to forget. To this day, large windows make my skin crawl. I know he's still out there, waiting for the next solitary traveler. Somewhere in the dark, he's still laughing. It was about 6 months ago when my father finally passed away. I'm not looking for sympathy, honestly. We didn't have what you'd call a good relationship. He wasn't a bad man, just hard to reach. At a young age, I realized I was nothing like him. I knew I'd never be the person he wanted me to be, and I think that realization bothered him more than he'd admit. So when he died, I was shocked to find his cabin in the will. My friends joked it was his final trick on me, but I think he just knew I'd be the one to sell it. He wanted me to close that chapter for good. To get the place ready for a buyer, I had to go up there. I needed to clean it out and fix a few things. I told myself it was a chance to say a final goodbye. The moment I stepped inside, I hit a wall of stench. It was a horrific, heavy smell that filled the entire house. It smelled like something had crawled inside and died months ago. My father hadn't actually been to the cabin in over a year. He passed away in a hospital, not here in the woods. I spent the first hour looking for a dead animal under the floorboards. I figured the place had just rotted from neglect. It was the kind of smell that sticks to your clothes. The interior looked exactly the same as it did when I was 10. Same gross plaid couches and the same dusty bookshelves. It was like a time capsule of a life I'd tried to forget. I spent hours downstairs, scrubbing every inch of the kitchen. Luckily, the roof was still in good shape. I checked off my list of repairs as the sun started to set, but as the house grew quiet, I started hearing things. It was a soft, rhythmic rustling coming from directly above me. I froze, listening to the sound of something moving in the ceiling. That was when I remembered the attic space. It was more of a crawl space, really, tucked away in the back hall. There was a pull-down cord in the ceiling of the back hallway. If you pulled it, a retractable wooden ladder would drop down. I stood under it for a long time, debating if I wanted to know. I assumed I was about to face a family of raccoons. Or maybe a squirrel had nested in the insulation. I grabbed a flashlight and finally gave the cord a tug. The ladder creaked as it unfolded into the dark hallway. As soon as the hatch opened, the smell became unbearable. It was 10 times worse than it had been downstairs. I had to pull my shirt over my nose just to breathe. I slowly started to climb, my heart thumping against my ribs. I poked my head up into the cramped, dark space. My flashlight beam cut through layers of thick dust. I expected to see old boxes of my father's hunting gear. Instead, I saw a sea of literal garbage. There were food wrappers, empty beer cans, and plastic bags everywhere. It looked like a dumping ground in the middle of a home. I knew my dad wasn't the cleanest guy in the world. But this was different. This was active, disgusting filth. I picked up a few wrappers, feeling a surge of irritation. I didn't have the energy to deal with this at night. I decided the attic could wait until the morning light. I went back downstairs and threw the small pile of trash away. I put some fresh sheets on my father's old bed. I tried to convince myself the smell was just old insulation. But sleep wouldn't come easily in that heavy, stagnant air. A stagnant air. Sometime in the middle of the night, I woke up with a start. The rustling was back, but it sounded much louder now. It wasn't the frantic scratching of a small animal. It was the slow, heavy movement of something much larger. It sounded like something was dragging itself across the floorboards. Across the floorboards. My mind raced, trying to find a logical explanation. I sat up in the dark, staring at the ceiling above the bed, and more it. I couldn't just lie there and listen to it anymore. I grabbed my phone and walked out into the back hallway. When my light hit the ceiling, my blood turned to ice. The attic hatch was wide open, and the ladder was down. I knew for a fact I had latched it shut before bed. I stood there, paralyzed, watching the dark opening in the ceiling. Then I saw something else on the floor at the base of the ladder. It was a fresh snack wrapper that hadn't been there before. Someone had come down from the attic while I was sleeping. I felt a wave of pure, unadulterated anger mask my fear. I snatched the wrapper and stormed toward the kitchen. I threw the trash in the bin and grabbed a bottle of water. There was no way I was going back to sleep now. I walked into the living room and sat on the old couch. I turned on a small end table lamp to cut the darkness. It cast a dim orange glow that barely reached the corners. I sat there, trying to process what was happening. Why would my father have lived like this in the attic? He had the whole cabin, so why hide in the filth? Then a terrifying thought started to take root in my mind. Maybe it wasn't my father who had been living up there. I looked toward the corner of the room, and my heart stopped. I stared at that wrapper on the floor for a long time. It was a brand of chips I never buy. Salt and vinegar. My father hated them too. This wasn't just old trash I'd missed during my cleaning. This was fresh. It was still crinkled, as if someone had just finished it. I looked up at the attic ladder again. The dark opening felt like an eye watching me. Me house in my I felt a cold sweat break out on my neck. On my neck, someone had been up there while I was sleeping. I didn't go back to the bedroom. I couldn't bring myself to walk back into that dark hall. I walked into the living room and sat on the couch. My keys were on the coffee table right in front of me. I kept my eyes fixed on the hallway leading to the attic. Every little creak of the house made me jump. I started thinking about my father again. Had he known about this? Had he shared this space with a stranger for years? The thought made my stomach turn. The silence of the woods felt heavy and suffocating. The only light came from a small lamp on the end table. It cast a weak, orange glow across the floor. The light didn't even reach the far walls. In the dimness, the furniture looked like hunched figures. I felt like I was in a cage of shadows. I tried to convince myself I was being paranoid. But raccoons don't open snack bags perfectly. They don't pull down retractable ladders. I was sharing this cabin with someone. I just didn't know where they were at that moment. My heart was hammering against my ribs. I scanned the room, looking for anything else out of place. That's when I saw it in the corner, right next to the old recliner. A heavy wool blanket was piled on the floor. I froze in place. I had spent 3 hours deep cleaning this exact room. I remembered wiping down the baseboards right there. There was no blanket on the floor when I went to bed. It was a dark, checkered pattern I didn't recognize. It looked like it was covering something bulky. My mind tried to tell me it was just laundry. I stood up slowly, my legs feeling like lead. I didn't want to go near it, but I had to know. I took a tentative step toward the corner. Then I took another. When I was about 3 feet away, I stopped. Protruding from the bottom of the blanket was a boot. It was old, caked in dried mud. It was completely worn through at the toe. It wasn't my father's boot, and it certainly wasn't mine. The realization hit me with the force of a physical blow. So I stood perfectly still, afraid a heartbeat would give me away. I stared at the center of that wool pile, and then I saw it shift. The blanket rose slowly, then fell. It was a rhythmic, steady motion. Breathing. Someone was fast asleep right at my feet. They were so close, I could have reached out and touched them. I could hear the faint, wet sound of a snore. This person had been watching me from the attic. Then they had come down to nap in the same room. I didn't wait for them to wake up. I didn't say a single word. I backed away toward the kitchen, my eyes on the blanket. I grabbed my phone and my car keys from the counter. My hands were shaking so hard, I nearly dropped them. I didn't grab my suitcase or my father's things. I just turned and bolted for the front door. I burst out into the freezing night air and ran. I didn't look back until I was inside my car. I fumbled with the ignition, praying the engine would start. The headlights finally cut through the dark. As I threw the car into reverse, I looked back. A man was standing in the doorway of the cabin. He looked mangy, with long, matted hair. He wore a tattered coat that looked years old. He didn't chase my car or scream. He just stood there in the orange light, watching me leave. I drove until I hit the main highway. Then I called the local police department. They told me he'd likely be living there for a year. My father hadn't visited the cabin in a long time. The man had simply moved in and stayed. I never stepped foot inside that cabin again. I couldn't even bring myself to pack my father's things. I hired a professional crew to clean it out instead. I didn't mention the man or the filth in the attic. I just wanted the memory of that night to be gone. The property sold quickly to a young couple from the city. I hope they find the peace my father once loved there. And I hope they never find a hidden guest in the walls. Some violations of privacy can never truly be undone. The cabin is out of my life, but the fear remains. I still have no idea who that man was, or where he went once the police arrived. He remains a total ghost, just like the others. The woman with the knife and the man in the suit. They are out there right now, drifting through the trees. We head to these remote cabins to escape the world. We tell ourselves that isolation is the ultimate sanctuary, that these stories prove we are never truly alone. There is always someone watching from the dark, or breathing softly in the same room as you. So if you ever find yourself in a lonely cabin, be very careful, because you never know who is already inside.